politicians warn of an invasion. The media show dramatic images of migrants crossing borders. We're told our societies are being overwhelmed. But here's the truth. Most of what you hear about illegal immigration isn't real. Despite all the tough talk, immigration levels in countries like the US and UK have hit record highs, even under leaders who promise to crack down. But while the media focuses on dramatic images of border crossings, the data tells a different story. Most migrants enter legally, yet politicians do very little to stop it. Therefore, even under the administration of someone like Donald Trump, illegal immigration persisted. As a researcher with a degree in migration studies, I've spent years closely following the news and political developments. So today, I want to answer a simple but crucial question. Is illegal immigration really out of control? Or is the so-called crisis more about perception than reality? If you listen to the loudest voices in politics, you'd think most immigrants sneak across the border in the dead of night. Politicians warn us about an unprecedented scale of immigration that threatens to change society forever. But here's the truth. 9 out of 10 immigrants are entering the US and UK legally. Therefore, an overwhelming majority of immigrants come through valid channels like work visas, green cards, or student permits. The data shows that most people coming into Western countries aren't sneaking across borders. They're following the rules and entering legally. Once their visas expired, they became undocumented. This is a huge part of the illegal immigration problem, and it's something that no border wall can fix. So let's put it in perspective. In Europe, estimates from 2008 put the number of undocumented migrants in the EU between 1.9 and 3.8 million. That includes the UK, which makes up a significant portion of that number. Therefore, roughly 0.4 to 0.8% of the EU's population and 7 to 13% of the foreign-born population are undocumented. In the UK, estimates suggest around 674,000 to 800,000 people are living in the country without proper documentation. That's about 1% of the total population. But the numbers are higher in the US. In 2018, there were about 10.5 million undocumented immigrants, accounting for roughly a quarter of the country's total foreign-born population, or about 3.2% of the total US population. And here's something no one talks about. The number of undocumented immigrants isn't rising. In the US, illegal immigration hasn't increased in over a decade. The number of undocumented immigrants has remained stable since 2007. But politicians still insist that illegal migration is out of control. Therefore, we have to ask, if illegal immigration isn't growing in the ways the media often suggests, what's driving this shift? The reality is that visa overstays are often left out of public debates, even though they're a major driver of the undocumented population. But the bigger question is, why are so many people coming to these countries in the first place? Because our economies depend on it. Therefore, governments and businesses don't just tolerate immigration, they actively encourage it. Think about it. If illegal immigration was really a national emergency, wouldn't we see massive crackdowns on the businesses hiring undocumented workers? Wouldn't governments aggressively enforce workplace laws? That is because immigration isn't some random event that just happens to a country. It's often the result of deliberate actions by governments and businesses actively recruiting migrant workers. The truth is that immigration isn't just random movement, it's a response to labor shortages. Industries like agriculture, construction, healthcare, and hospitality rely on immigrant workers. These jobs are tough, poorly paid, and often physically demanding, jobs that native-born citizens don't want. Therefore, businesses look elsewhere for workers. In fact, in 2016, 50% of agricultural workers in the US were undocumented, and the construction industry employs over 1 million undocumented workers. But without this migrant workforce, many of these industries would face a collapse or a major crisis. The reality is that many of these workers didn't necessarily sneak across the border. They were actively recruited by businesses in need of labor. And once they're here, employers are often willing to overlook their documentation in order to fill immediate labor needs. Once these migrant communities become established, new workers often arrive in a more spontaneous and sometimes illegal manner. As established migrants help new arrivals find jobs and navigate the system, it becomes easier for people to enter the workforce, even if they lack the proper documentation. Many of these workers did not require travel visas and, in fact, had a much easier time finding legal employment due to the ongoing labor shortage. Governments know this. Businesses know this. Yet politicians still act shocked when migrants stay. If governments wanted to stop illegal immigration, they wouldn't just build border fences, but instead, they would go after employers who hire undocumented workers. The problem is, they don't. So we have to question whether politicians truly want to solve this issue or just use it as a political tool. The US government spends billions each year trying to stop illegal immigration, with agencies like Immigration and Customs Enforcement tasked with policing both the border and workplaces. But despite all the money and effort, ICE's attempts to control illegal immigration have proven largely ineffective. In the early 2000s, ICE's budget for enforcement exceeded $5 billion, but a small fraction of that was allocated to investigating workplace violations. Instead, a substantial portion was dedicated to border enforcement, making border arrests and cracking down on crossings. However, as you now know, illegal immigrants are not crossing the border illegally. Between 2003 and 2017, workplace enforcement actions dropped dramatically. In 2003, ICE conducted over 10,000 worksite inspections. But by 2017, that number had plummeted to just 1,360. As a consequence, businesses hiring undocumented workers were facing less scrutiny than ever before. For context, in the mid-2000s, businesses were regularly inspected and audited for immigration law compliance. But enforcement efforts decreased, and employers had little reason to fear consequences. In 2016, just 500 individuals were arrested as a result of workplace audits. With an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the US at the time, the chances of being arrested during a workplace audit were less than 0.3%. In other words, your chances of being arrested for working without documentation were lower than the odds of being struck by lightning. ICE's enforcement capabilities are woefully insufficient to handle the scale of the problem. With millions of businesses in the US employing workers, the agency is simply unable to monitor every workplace. Why then does the conversation around illegal immigration remain so dominated by tough talk and fear-mongering? It's because politicians use the image of an invasion, or a crisis, as a way to rally support from voters, often stoking fear and anger to galvanize their base. But in reality, much of the fear surrounding illegal immigration is rooted in symbolism rather than substance. In countries like the US and the UK, politicians and the media continuously exploit the issue of immigration to build a sense of urgency and fear without addressing the core problems of labor demand and the economic drivers behind migration. In the UK, for example, the government passed a series of immigration laws in 2016 designed to create a hostile environment for illegal immigrants. These laws aimed to make life difficult for undocumented migrants by targeting employers who hired them. But once again, the reality fell short of the rhetoric. Between 2015 and 2017, only a handful of employers were prosecuted for hiring undocumented workers. In fact, workplace inspections, which should have been a key aspect of tackling illegal immigration, became far less frequent. The media plays a major role in perpetuating this crisis narrative. These images, caravans of migrants, border fences, and dramatic confrontations with authorities, are far more compelling than discussing the more complex reality of immigration. A workforce driven by economic necessity, a demand for labor that continues to be met regardless of legal status, and an ineffective enforcement system that struggles to address the root causes of migration. So, what does all of this mean? While politicians and the media continue to stoke fear with tough talk about illegal immigration, the reality is far less dramatic. Most migrants enter countries legally, and the true drivers of illegal immigration are overstays, not border crossings. The real question we should be asking is why we continue to focus on symbolic policies that do little to address the root causes of immigration. Only then can we have an honest, informed conversation about how to address the issues surrounding immigration.